I'm Amanda Collins, 32, and I thought I had it all figured out. After 6 years of building my boss's consulting firm from the ground up, I was finally marrying the love of my life. But as I stood in my wedding dress, checking my phone one last time before walking down the aisle, I found an email that shattered everything. "You're fired." The humiliation burned deeper than I could have imagined. He couldn't even wait until after my honeymoon. But what Richard didn't know was that while he was busy taking credit for my work, I'd been quietly building something he never saw coming. 3 months later, when his biggest client called me CEO, the tables would turn in a way that would leave him begging. If you've ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted, like and subscribe for stories of resilience and unexpected justice. That morning had started like a fairy tale. I woke up in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by my bridesmaids, with sunlight streaming through lace curtains. The wedding program lay on my dresser, elegant cream cardstock with gold lettering that read Amanda Collins and Michael Harrison, a celebration of love. We'd spent months perfecting every detail, from the font choice to the order of ceremonies. My maid of honor, Lisa, was bustling around with the photographer, capturing every moment of preparation. The dress, a vintage-inspired A-line with delicate beading, had been my grandmother's, altered to fit perfectly. As I slipped into it, I felt connected to generations of women in my family who had worn it before me. "You look absolutely radiant," my mother whispered, tears glistening in her eyes as she fastened the pearl necklace that had been her wedding gift to me. Michael and I had met 3 years ago at a conference where I was presenting on strategic business development. He was there representing his architecture firm, and we'd bonded over our shared ambition and values. He understood my drive, my need to prove myself in a male-dominated industry. He'd supported my long hours and weekend work sessions, never making me feel guilty for prioritizing my career. The ceremony was set for 4 p.m. at the historic Riverside Chapel, followed by a reception at the country club where we'd had our first official date. Everything was perfect: the flowers, the music, the guest list of 150 people who had traveled from across the country to celebrate with us. But I'd always been a perfectionist, someone who checked and double-checked every detail. It was a habit that had served me well in business, ensuring no client presentation went out with errors, no contract was signed without thorough review. So when Lisa handed me my phone, suggesting I do one final check of emails before the ceremony, I didn't hesitate. "Just in case there's anything urgent from work," I said, though I knew Richard had promised to handle everything while I was away. The email was there in my inbox, timestamped just 20 minutes earlier. Subject line: employment termination. Effective immediately. My hands shook as I opened it. "Amanda, after careful consideration, we have decided to terminate your employment with Hartwell Consulting effective immediately. Your final paycheck will be processed according to company policy. Please do not contact clients or return to the office. All company property must be returned within 48 hours. Thank you for your service. Richard Hartwell, CEO." The words blurred together as I read them again and again. 6 years of dedication, of building his company from a struggling 2-person operation into a thriving firm with 12 employees and millions in annual revenue. 6 years of sacrificing weekends, of missing family gatherings, of pouring my heart and soul into making his dreams come true, and he fired me via email. On my wedding day, Lisa noticed my expression first. "Amanda? What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I couldn't speak. I just handed her the phone, watching her face transform from concern to outrage as she read. That absolute peace. She caught herself, remembering we were in a church. How could he do this today? How could anyone be so cruel? The room fell silent as the other bridesmaids gathered around, reading the email over Lisa's shoulder. Their gasps and exclamations of disbelief felt distant, like I was underwater, drowning in the magnitude of this betrayal. My mother appeared at my side, her wedding day glow replaced by fierce maternal protection. "We can deal with this after the honeymoon, sweetheart. Today is about you and Michael." But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about timing. The email was calculated, deliberate. Richard had chosen this moment specifically because he knew I couldn't respond, couldn't fight back, couldn't do anything but endure the humiliation while pretending to be the happiest woman alive. The wedding program in my hands suddenly felt heavy, a reminder of all the joy this day was supposed to represent. Instead, it would forever be tainted by the memory of professional betrayal, of trust shattered in the most public way possible. But as I stood there, surrounded by the people who loved me most, something shifted inside me. The shock began to crystallize into something harder, more determined. Richard thought he could break me on the most important day of my life. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. The original employment contract was still in my home office file cabinet, yellowed with age and signed with the hopeful enthusiasm of a 26-year-old graduate fresh from her MBA program. Senior consultant, it read, though the reality was far Different from the title suggested. I'd found Richard's listing on a job board, a small consulting firm looking for someone with entrepreneurial spirit and willingness to grow with the company. What I discovered when I walked into his cramped office above a dry cleaner was a man drowning in his own ambitions. Hartwell Consulting consisted of Richard, his secretary Margaret, and a mountain of unpaid bills scattered across a desk that hadn't been organized in months. "I won't lie to you," Richard had said during that first interview, his tie loosened and his shirt wrinkled from stress. "We're struggling. I started this company 3 years ago with big dreams and limited capital. I need someone who can help me turn this ship around." That honesty had impressed me. Here was a man willing to admit his failures, to acknowledge that he needed help. I saw potential in his client list, small businesses that needed strategic guidance but couldn't afford the big consulting firms downtown. With the right approach, the right systems, we could carve out a profitable niche. My first project was reorganizing their entire operational structure. I spent weeks creating client management systems, developing proposal templates, and implementing the project tracking software that would eventually become the backbone of our success. Richard watched me work with a mixture of admiration and relief, like a drowning man who'd been thrown a life preserver. "You're exactly what this company needed," he told me after my first month, when I'd successfully retained 2 clients who were about to leave and secured a new contract worth $50,000. "I don't know what I would have done without you." The small victories began to accumulate. I developed a comprehensive client onboarding process that reduced confusion and improved satisfaction rates. I created detailed project timelines that kept us on schedule and under budget. Most importantly, I began building relationships with our clients that went beyond mere service provision. I became their trusted advisor, the person they called when they needed strategic guidance. Richard's role gradually shifted from hands-on consultant to face of the company. He was naturally charismatic, great at networking events and industry conferences. He could sell our services with genuine enthusiasm, but when it came to actual delivery, he increasingly relied on my expertise and systems. The turning point came in year 3 when I landed our first major corporate client, Meridian Industries. Their CEO, Patricia Vance, had been impressed by a presentation I'd given at a local business forum on operational efficiency. She approached me afterward, not Richard, and asked if we could help streamline their supply chain management. That project became our showcase success. Over 6 months, I worked closely with Meridian's executive team, identifying inefficiencies that were costing them millions annually. My recommendations saved them 23% on operational costs while improving delivery times by 35%. The case study became the foundation of our marketing materials for years to come, but in every presentation, every marketing brochure, every client meeting, it was Richard's name in the spotlight. Richard Hartwell's innovative approach to supply chain optimization, the materials read. Under Richard's leadership, Meridian Industries achieved unprecedented efficiency gains. I told myself it didn't matter. I was learning, growing, building expertise that would serve me well throughout my career. The title on my business card had evolved from senior consultant to director of strategic operations, and my salary had grown accordingly. I had equity in the company, a small percentage that Richard had offered during year 4 when I'd mentioned considering other opportunities. The clients knew who was really doing the work. Patricia Vance made it clear that she considered me the primary point of contact for all strategic initiatives. Other clients followed suit, requesting me specifically for their projects. Richard seemed comfortable with this arrangement, often joking that I was the brains behind the operation, while he was the face of the company. By year 5, we'd grown to 12 employees and moved into a modern office space downtown. The company was generating over $3 million in annual revenue, and I was managing 80% of the client relationships. Richard had hired additional consultants, but they all reported to me. I was, in everything but title, the chief operating officer of the company. The contract I'd signed 6 years ago promised performance bonuses and equity increases based on company growth. I'd never seen either. When I raised the issue with Richard, he always had explanations: cash flow concerns, upcoming expenses, the need to reinvest profits for future growth. He'd pat my shoulder and promise that my loyalty would be rewarded when the company went public or found a buyer. "You're building something here, Amanda," he'd say. "When this company gets acquired, you'll be set for life." I believed him because I wanted to believe him. Because I'd invested so much of myself in building his dream that walking away felt like admitting failure. Because the clients trusted me, and I took that responsibility seriously. The warning signs had been there. The new hires he'd made without consulting me. The client meetings he'd started taking alone. The way he'd begun speaking about his vision and his strategies in industry publications, as if the innovations I'd developed were somehow his original. ideas, but I'd been too focused on the work, too invested in the client relationships, too trusting of the man who'd once been so grateful for my contributions. I'd built Richard's empire for him, and in return, he'd built my professional grave. The employment contract in my file cabinet was proof of my naivety, but it was also evidence of everything I'd achieved. Every system, every process, every client relationship, it was all my work. And now, standing in my wedding dress with his termination email burning in my memory, I realized something Richard had never considered. I hadn't just been building his company. I'd been building my own expertise, my own reputation, my own network of relationships. He thought he was discarding me. Instead, he was setting me free. The honeymoon photos tell a story I couldn't hide from the camera. Michael and I are standing on the balcony of our suite in Santorini, the Mediterranean sunset painting the sky in shades of orange and pink behind us. My smile is radiant, my new husband's arm wrapped protectively around my waist, but if you look closely at my eyes, you can see the shadow that Richard's email cast over what should have been the happiest week of my life. "You're thinking about it again," Michael said on our third morning, catching me staring at my phone over breakfast. The terrace overlooked the caldera, with whitewashed buildings cascading down the cliffside like a postcard come to life, but I couldn't focus on the beauty surrounding us. "I'm sorry," I said, setting the phone face down on the table. "I know this is supposed to be about us." Michael reached across the table and took my hand. "Amanda, this isn't just about work. This is about 6 years of your life. It's about someone you trusted betraying you in the cruelest possible way. Of course you're thinking about it." That's when I knew I'd married the right man. Not because he was understanding about my distraction, but because he understood the magnitude of what had happened. He'd seen me come home exhausted from 18-hour days, watched me pour my heart into building something I believed in, celebrated with me when we landed major contracts. He knew this wasn't just about losing a job, it was about losing an identity I'd spent years creating. "What are you going to do?" he asked, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me wants to fight back, to expose what he's done. But another part just wants to walk away and start fresh somewhere else. "You could do either," Michael said. "You could also do both." That night, as we walked along the beach in Oia, I found myself really thinking about my options for the first time since the wedding. The shock was wearing off, replaced by something sharper and more focused. I'd been so busy feeling victimized that I hadn't stopped to consider my actual position. I had 6 years of experience building a consulting firm from the ground up. I had relationships with every major client Richard's company served. I had systems and processes that I'd developed myself, strategies that had proven successful in multiple industries. Most importantly, I had a reputation in the business community that was entirely my own. "He fired me because he was afraid of me," I said suddenly, stopping in the sand. Michael turned to look at me, his expression curious. "What do you mean?" "Think about it. Why now? Why on my wedding day?" It wasn't just cruelty, it was strategy. He knew I was getting married, knew I'd be distracted and unable to respond immediately. He probably thought I'd be so focused on starting my new life that I wouldn't have the energy to fight back. The pieces were falling into place. Richard had been planning this for months. The new hires he'd made without consulting me, the client meetings he'd started taking alone, the way he'd begun positioning himself as the sole face of the company, he'd been systematically removing me from the equation while keeping me too busy to notice. But he'd made one critical error. He'd assumed that firing me would somehow transfer the loyalty and trust I'd built with our clients. He'd assumed that my relationships were somehow his property, that the contracts I'd negotiated and the strategies I'd developed would continue to work without me. Michael was watching me process this realization, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You're not just going to walk away, are you?" "No," I said, feeling something shift inside me. "I'm not." We spent the rest of the week planning. Not obsessively, we still enjoyed our honeymoon, still made love on the beach and ate dinner at restaurants overlooking the Aegean Sea. But in the quiet moments, when we were walking through the narrow streets of Fira or sitting on our balcony with morning coffee, we talked about what came next. Michael's architectural firm was stable and growing, which meant we had financial security while I figured out my next move. I had savings from 6 years of steady income, plus a small emergency fund I'd been building since graduate school. More importantly, I had skills that were in demand and relationships that extended far beyond Richard's company. "I'm not going to compete with him," I told Michael on our last night. "I'm going to make him irrelevant." The honeymoon photos captured the beginning of my transformation. In the early pictures, I look wounded, distracted, like someone trying to pretend everything is fine. But by the end of the week, there's something different in my expression. A determination that wasn't there before. A quiet confidence that spoke of plans being made and decisions being reached. Richard thought he was ending my career. Instead, he was launching it, when we landed back home, I felt ready for whatever came next. The hurt was still there, the sense of betrayal still sharp, but it was tempered now by something more powerful. The absolute certainty that I was going to prove him wrong. The internal company memo that would later surface during legal proceedings revealed the depth of Richard's calculation. Dated 3 weeks before my wedding, it outlined his strategic restructuring plan with clinical precision that left no doubt about his true intentions. Amanda Collins has become a liability to company growth, he'd written to his lawyer. Her influence with clients has exceeded healthy boundaries, creating dependency that limits our scalability. Several clients have explicitly requested her involvement in projects, bypassing proper chain of command. This concentration of client relationships in one employee creates unacceptable risk. What he didn't write, but what became clear through his actions, was that he'd grown to fear me. Not fear my anger or my potential for revenge, but fear my competence. Fear that clients valued my judgment over his. Fear that his own company had outgrown his ability to manage it, the memo continued. Termination must be executed during a period when Collins will be unable to immediately respond or contact clients. Wedding leave provides optimal timing. New hires Peterson and Matthews can handle existing accounts with minimal disruption. Peterson and Matthews. 2 recent MBA graduates he'd hired at half my salary, convinced they could simply step into my role and maintain the relationships I'd spent years building. He'd introduced them to clients as rising stars in the firm, never mentioning that they'd be replacing me entirely. From Richard's perspective, the plan was flawless. Fire me when I couldn't fight back, replace me with cheaper alternatives, and retain the revenue streams I'd created. He'd calculated everything except the one variable that mattered most, that the relationships weren't really his to transfer. His first mistake was underestimating the personal connections I'd built with clients. These weren't just business relationships, they were partnerships built on trust, mutual respect, and proven results. Patricia Vance at Meridian Industries didn't work with Amanda Collins because Richard Hartwell employed her. She worked with me because I'd saved her company millions of dollars and earned her board's confidence. His second mistake was believing his own mythology. After years of taking credit for my work, he'd convinced himself that he was actually responsible for the company's success. He'd begun to believe that clients sought out Hartwell Consulting because of his reputation, not because of my expertise. The memo revealed his third and most fatal error. Collins lacks the entrepreneurial drive to establish competing practice. Her personality profile suggests she will seek employment with established firm rather than risk independent venture. He'd studied me for 6 years and completely misread who I was. He saw compliance where there was strategic patience. He saw dependence where there was careful planning. He saw an employee who would quietly accept dismissal and move on to another job, grateful for the experience and references he might provide. Richard had built his entire plan around the assumption that I would disappear quietly. He'd chosen my wedding day not just for the tactical advantage of my inability to respond immediately, but because he believed the emotional trauma would paralyze me. He thought the humiliation would be so complete that I'd be too broken to fight back. The memo's final paragraph revealed his ultimate delusion. With Collins removed, company will achieve independence from individual contributors, creating standardized service delivery that supports sustainable growth and eventual sale. He actually believed he could systematize what I'd built. He thought my success was reproducible through proper procedures and adequate training. He'd completely missed that consulting isn't about processes, it's about relationships, trust, and the kind of strategic thinking that can't be taught in a weekend workshop. Within days of my termination, Richard began implementing his plan. He scheduled meetings with major clients to introduce Peterson and Matthews as their new primary contacts. He updated company materials to remove references to my specific achievements, replacing them with generic descriptions of our team's innovative approaches. He even prepared a script for handling client questions about my departure. Amanda Collins has decided to pursue new opportunities. We wish her well and are confident that our expanded team will continue to exceed your expectations. But for all his planning, Richard had overlooked one crucial detail. He'd spent so much time analyzing my weaknesses that he'd forgotten to consider my strengths. He'd focused so intently on removing me from his equation that he'd never asked what I might do with the knowledge, experience, and relationships I'd built. His memo concluded with a timeline: Collins termination, Friday. Client transition meetings following Monday. New organizational structure announcement, Wednesday. Anticipated completion of transition, 30 days. 30 days. He'd given himself a month to replace 6 years of relationship building, strategic development, and proven results. He'd allocated 4 weeks to convince clients who'd explicitly requested my involvement in their projects that 2 inexperienced graduates could deliver the same level of service. The memo was evidence of meticulous planning combined with fundamental misunderstanding. Richard had orchestrated every detail of my destruction while completely miscalculating the consequences of his actions. He'd created the perfect plan for eliminating Amanda Collins, the employee, while inadvertently launching Amanda Collins, the entrepreneur. Reading that memo months later, I felt a mixture of anger and pity. Anger at the calculated cruelty of choosing my wedding day for maximum emotional impact. Pity for a man so insecure in his own abilities that he had to destroy others to feel powerful, but mostly, I felt grateful. Richard's memo had documented not just his plan to remove me, but his complete misunderstanding of my value and capabilities. It was a roadmap of his weaknesses, a detailed analysis of every mistake he was about to make. He'd shown me exactly how to beat him. The Meridian Industries contract sat in my home office like a masterpiece I'd painted and then been forced to abandon. 47 pages of detailed specifications, deliverables, and strategic objectives that represented 3 years of relationship building and the most complex project I'd ever managed. Richard had signed it as CEO, but every clause, every timeline, every success metric had been crafted by me. I remembered the first time I'd met Patricia Vance at that business forum downtown. She'd approached me after my presentation on operational efficiency, her expression skeptical but intrigued. "Miss Collins, you made some interesting points about supply chain optimization. But I've heard these theories before. What makes you different?" Most consultants would have launched into their standard pitch about proprietary methodologies and proven track records. Instead, I'd asked her a simple question: what's keeping you awake at night? That question changed everything. Patricia had been dealing with a nightmare scenario: critical components arriving late, production schedules in chaos, customer satisfaction plummeting. Traditional consulting firms had offered generic solutions that didn't address the root causes of her problems. "I don't need another PowerPoint presentation," she'd said. "I need someone who understands that every day we're behind schedule costs us customers and credibility." I'd spent the next 2 hours in her office, not presenting solutions but asking questions. What was her current supplier network? Where were the bottlenecks occurring? What internal processes were creating delays? How were decisions being made, and who had the authority to implement changes? By the end of that meeting, I'd identified 3 critical issues that no previous consultant had addressed. Her procurement team was using outdated software that couldn't track real-time inventory. Her production scheduling was based on historical data that didn't account for seasonal variations. Most importantly, her suppliers weren't communicating with each other, creating redundancies and conflicts that rippled through the entire system. "Give me 90 days, I'd told her. If I can't demonstrate measurable improvements in that time, you don't pay a penny." Patricia had laughed, not mockingly, but with genuine surprise. "You're either very confident or very naive, Miss Collins." "I'm thorough," I'd replied. "And I don't make promises I can't keep." The contract we eventually signed was unlike anything Richard had seen before. Instead of the standard consulting agreement with vague deliverables and open-ended timelines, I'd created a performance-based structure with specific metrics and guaranteed outcomes. We'd be paid based on actual results, cost savings, efficiency improvements, and customer satisfaction scores. Richard had been nervous about the arrangement. What if we can't deliver? What if there are factors beyond our control? But I'd already done my homework. I'd spent weeks analyzing Meridian's operations, identifying exactly where improvements could be made and calculating the potential impact. I wasn't making promises based on hope, I was making commitments based on data. The implementation had been complex and demanding. I'd worked directly with Meridian's executive team, sitting in on board meetings and strategic planning sessions. I'd interviewed department heads, analyzed workflow patterns, and identified inefficiencies that had been accepted as just the way things work. The breakthrough came when I discovered that Meridian's 3 largest suppliers were actually owned by the same parent company, but they weren't coordinating their deliveries. Components that should have arrived together were coming at different times, creating storage costs and production delays. A simple scheduling change that I negotiated directly with the parent company eliminated 40% of their logistics problems overnight. Patricia had been amazed. "How did you see that when no one else did?" "Because I wasn't looking for what I expected to find," I'd said. "I was looking for what was actually happening." The results had exceeded everyone's expectations. Over 6 months, my recommendations had reduced Meridian's operational costs by 23% while improving delivery times by 35%. Customer satisfaction scores had increased by 28%, and employee productivity had improved by 15%, but more importantly, I'd built a relationship with Patricia that went beyond typical vendor-client dynamics. She'd begun calling me for advice on strategic decisions that had nothing to do with our contract. When she was considering a merger with a competitor, she'd asked for my analysis. When she was planning a major expansion, she'd wanted my input on operational scaling. "You're not just our consultant," she told me during one of our quarterly reviews. "You're our strategic partner. I trust your judgment more than most of my own executives." That trust had been earned through countless late nights, weekend strategy sessions, and the kind of detailed follow-through that most consultants abandoned once their initial deliverables were complete. I'd stayed engaged with Meridian's success because their success was my success. The contract renewal we'd signed earlier this year was even more comprehensive than the original agreement. Patricia had asked me to lead a company-wide digital transformation initiative, a project that would span 2 years and involve every department. It was the kind of engagement that consultants dream about: high visibility, significant impact, and the chance to work with a client who truly valued strategic thinking. Richard had been thrilled about the contract renewal, of course. At the company meeting where he'd announced it, he'd taken full credit for securing Meridian's continued confidence in our strategic capabilities. He presented the project as validation of his leadership and vision, never mentioning that Patricia had specifically requested my involvement in every phase of the work, but the contract told a different story. Buried in the legal language were clauses that Patricia's legal team had insisted upon, clauses that specified my personal involvement in all major decisions, required my approval for any changes to project scope, and gave Meridian the right to terminate the agreement if I was no longer available to oversee the work. Patricia had been protecting her investment. She'd seen enough consulting firms promise one level of service and deliver another. She'd structured the contract to ensure that the person who delivered results in the past would be the person responsible for delivering results in the future. Now, sitting in my home office and reviewing those 47 pages, I realized that Richard had no idea what he'd lost. He'd fired the one person who understood every detail of his most valuable client relationship. He'd eliminated the consultant who'd spent 3 years building trust and delivering results. He'd terminated the employee who was specifically named in a multi-million-dollar contract as essential to project success. The Meridian contract wasn't just a business agreement, it was a testament to what could be accomplished when trust, expertise, and commitment aligned. It was proof that I'd built something valuable, something that couldn't be easily replaced or replicated, and it was about to become the foundation of my new career. The business license application was deceptively simple, a single page that would transform me from employee to entrepreneur. I filled it out at my kitchen table on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after returning from my honeymoon, with Michael's laptop open beside me as I researched LLC formation requirements. Collins Strategic Consulting, I wrote in the business name field, then paused. Using my own name felt both empowering and terrifying. For 6 years, I'd been hiding behind Richard's brand, his reputation, his company's identity. Now I was stepping into the spotlight entirely on my own. The application asked for a business description. I stared at the blank space, thinking about how to capture what I actually did versus what my old business cards had claimed. Strategic business consulting. With focus on operational efficiency, supply chain optimization, and organizational development, I finally typed. Simple, direct, and entirely true. Michael found me still at the kitchen table 2 hours later, surrounded by printed articles about business formation, tax implications, and liability insurance. He set a cup of coffee beside me and peered over my shoulder at the laptop screen. "How are you feeling about all this?" he asked. "Terrified," I admitted. "But also more excited than I've been in years." That was the truth. The fear was real, the fear of failure, fear of financial uncertainty, fear of discovering that my success had been more about Richard's platform than my own abilities. But underneath the fear was something I hadn't felt in a long time, pure, unadulterated excitement about the possibilities ahead. That I'd spent the previous week doing research that went far beyond business formation. I'd analyzed the consulting market, identified potential competitors, and studied successful independent consultants to understand what made them different from larger firms. The more I learned, the more confident I became that there was space. For someone like me, the established consulting firms were too big and impersonal for mid-sized companies like Meridian. They sent teams of junior consultants who delivered generic solutions and disappeared once the contract ended. The small consulting firms were often one-person operations that couldn't handle complex, multi-phase projects. I could offer something different: the personal attention of a small firm with the expertise and systems of a larger operation. I could provide the kind of strategic thinking that comes from years of hands-on experience, combined with the follow-through that ensures lasting results. The license application required me to specify my business address. I'd considered renting office space, but Michael had suggested starting from home to minimize overhead. We'd converted his rarely used study into a proper office, complete with a conference table for client meetings and a whiteboard for strategic planning. "This is where it all begins," I'd said, standing in the doorway of my new office space. "No," Michael had corrected. "This is where it all continues. You've been building toward this for years." He was right. Every client relationship I'd developed, every system I'd created, every successful project I'd completed had been preparation for this moment. I wasn't starting from scratch, I was building on a foundation of proven experience and established credibility. The hardest part of the application was the section about previous business experience. How do you explain that you've been running a successful consulting practice for 6 years, except it was technically someone else's company? How do you describe your role in generating millions in revenue when your name wasn't on the contracts? I settled on honesty: 6 years experience in strategic business consulting, with direct responsibility for client relationship management, project development, and service delivery. Successfully managed consulting engagements resulting in documented cost savings exceeding $50 million for clients across multiple industries. Every word was verifiable. Every claim was backed by concrete results. If Richard wanted to challenge my credentials, he'd have to explain how someone with no real experience had achieved such impressive outcomes. The application fee was $150, a modest investment that felt monumental in its implications. I was buying my independence, purchasing the legal right to compete with the man who'd betrayed me. I was betting everything on my ability to succeed outside the safety net of someone else's established business. After submitting the application online, I sat back and realized I'd just taken the first official step toward a future I'd never fully imagined. For years, I'd assumed I'd eventually become a partner in Richard's firm, or maybe move to a larger consulting company where I could have more autonomy. I'd never seriously considered going completely independent, but Richard had forced my hand. And in doing so, he'd given me something I might never have claimed for myself: the necessity of betting on my own abilities. He'd pushed me off the cliff, and now I was discovering I could fly. The confirmation email arrived within minutes: "Your business license application has been approved. Welcome to entrepreneurship." It was automated, impersonal, but it felt like a celebration. I printed the license and pinned it to the bulletin board in my new office, right next to my MBA diploma and a photo from my wedding. 3 symbols of important transitions: my education, my marriage, and now my career independence. Michael found me there an hour later, still staring at the license like I couldn't quite believe it was real. "So," he said, "how does it feel to be a CEO?" "Ask me in 6 months," I replied. "Right now, I'm just trying to figure out what comes next." But even as I said it, I knew exactly what came next. I had clients to call, relationships to rebuild, and a business to launch. I had 6 years of preparation behind me and unlimited possibilities ahead. Richard thought he'd ended my career. Instead, he'd given me the push I needed to start building something entirely my own. The LinkedIn message thread that started everything began with a simple notification: "You have 7 new messages." I'd been avoiding social media since the firing, not ready to update my profile or deal with the inevitable questions about my sudden departure from Hartwell Consulting. But curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the app to find messages from colleagues I hadn't spoken to in years. The first was from Jessica Chen, a former client who'd moved to a different company 6 months ago. "Amanda, I heard about what happened at Hartwell. I'm so sorry, that's absolutely unprofessional. Are you interested in freelance work? We have a project that would be perfect for you." The second was from Marcus Thompson, a consultant at a competing firm. "Can't believe Richard would treat you like that. Everyone knows you were the real talent behind Hartwell's success. Let me know if you want to grab coffee, I might have some opportunities to discuss." The messages kept coming. Former colleagues, industry contacts, even people I'd met briefly at conferences were reaching out with condolences, job offers, and expressions of support. But what struck me most wasn't the volume of responses, it was the consistency of the message. Everyone seemed to know that I'd been the driving force behind Hartwell's success. David Martinez, who'd worked with me on a joint project 2 years ago, was particularly direct: "Richard's reputation in the industry is built on your work. We all know it. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" That evening, I called Jessica back. We'd worked together when she was VP of operations at a manufacturing company, and I'd helped them streamline their production processes. She'd been impressed enough to recommend me to 3 other companies, all of which had become Hartwell clients. "I've been following your work for years," she said. "When I heard Richard fired you, my first thought was that he'd just made the biggest mistake of his career. My second thought was that this might be the best thing that ever happened to you. She went on to explain that her new company, a rapidly growing tech startup, needed help scaling their operations. They'd grown from 50 employees to 200 in the past year, and their systems were breaking down under the pressure. "We need someone who understands growth challenges," she said. "Someone who can come in and fix what's broken without destroying what's working. That's exactly what you did for us before." The project she described was perfect, complex enough to showcase my skills, visible enough to establish my independent reputation, and valuable enough to provide substantial income during my transition period. More importantly, it was the kind of work I'd been doing for years, just under my own name instead of Richards. Marcus's coffee invitation turned into a 3-hour strategy session at a downtown cafe. He'd been working in consulting for 8 years and had watched my career from a distance, often wondering when I'd strike out on my own. "You know what the industry consensus is about Hartwell Consulting?" he asked. "That it's a one-person show disguised as a real firm. Everyone knows Richard's just the front man. The question we've all been asking is when Amanda Collins was going to realize she didn't need him." He'd heard rumors about my termination within hours of it happening. Word traveled fast in the consulting world, especially when it involved someone with my reputation. Several firms had already reached out to him, asking if he knew how to contact me. "They want to hire you," he said. "Not recruit you, hire you as an independent contractor. They know you're worth more than any salary they could offer." The LinkedIn messages continued throughout the week. Sarah Rodriguez, a former Hartwell employee who'd left the company 6 months before my termination, was particularly insightful. "I left because I could see the writing on the wall. Richard was threatened by anyone who showed real competence. He kept the mediocre people and pushed out anyone who might challenge his authority. Firing you was inevitable. He couldn't handle having someone around who made him look incompetent by comparison." She went on to describe a pattern I'd been too close to see. Other talented employees had left Hartwell over the years, always under mysterious circumstances. Richard would find excuses to terminate anyone who developed independent relationships with clients or showed too much initiative. "The difference is that you were too valuable to fire until now," she wrote. "But your success had grown beyond his ability to control, so he had to eliminate you before you eliminated him." Emma Wilson, a procurement specialist I'd worked with at Meridian, sent a message that made me laugh out loud. "Heard about your liberation from Hartwell. About time. Patricia's been saying for months that you should start your own firm. We all know who was really running that place." The messages weren't just expressions of support, they were business opportunities. Within 2 weeks, I had inquiries about 6 different projects, ranging from short-term efficiency assessments to long-term strategic planning engagements. People weren't just offering me sympathy, they were offering me work. Benjamin Rogers, a business development executive I'd met at a conference, was particularly direct. "I've been waiting for you to go independent for 2 years. We have a client who specifically asked for that consultant from Hartwell who actually knows what she's doing." Turns out they meant you, not Richard. The LinkedIn thread had become a masterclass in professional networking. I was discovering that my reputation extended far beyond what I'd realized. While I'd been focused on doing good work and building client relationships, I'd inadvertently created a network of advocates throughout the industry. Most surprising was a message from Patricia Vance herself. "Amanda, we need to talk. This changes everything about the Meridian project. Can you come in Monday morning?" I stared at that message for a long time. Patricia knew about my termination, and she wanted to discuss how it affected our project. Given the specific contract clauses that required my involvement, Richard might have bigger problems than just losing a talented employee. As I scrolled through the dozens of messages, I realized that Richard had made a fundamental miscalculation. He'd assumed that my professional relationships were somehow his property, that firing me would transfer my credibility to his company. Instead, he discovered that the industry knew exactly who had been responsible for Hartwell's success. The LinkedIn thread was more than just a collection of supportive messages. It was evidence that I'd built something valuable over the past 6 years, not just business systems and client relationships, but a professional reputation that belonged entirely to me. Richard had tried to erase me from his company. Instead, he'd revealed that I'd outgrown his company years ago. The client complaint email that arrived in my personal inbox 3 weeks after my termination was forwarded by a sympathetic former colleague who still worked at Hartwell. The subject line read, "Urgent, Project Status Inquiry, Meridian Industries." And the sender was Patricia Vance herself. "Richard," the email began, "I've been trying to reach Amanda Collins for 2 weeks regarding the digital transformation timeline we discussed. Her office line has been disconnected, and she's not responding to emails. Peterson and Matthews seem unfamiliar with the project specifications we agreed upon. Please have Amanda contact me immediately. We have board presentation deadlines that cannot be missed." My former colleague had added a note at the top, "Thought you should see this. Richard's been telling everyone that the transition is going smoothly. Clearly, that's not the case." I stared at the email, feeling a mixture of vindication and concern. Vindication because it confirmed what I'd suspected: Richard had no idea how to manage the relationships I'd built. Concern because Patricia was obviously frustrated, and I genuinely cared about Meridian's success. The timeline Patricia mentioned was something I'd developed after months of detailed analysis. It wasn't just a project schedule, it was a carefully orchestrated sequence of changes designed to minimize disruption while maximizing impact. Every phase was calibrated to work with Meridian's existing systems, and every milestone was tied to specific business outcomes. Peterson and Matthews wouldn't understand the nuances because they hadn't been involved in the planning process. They'd inherited a complex project midstream without the context or relationships necessary to execute it effectively. Richard had assumed that good consulting was just about following procedures, but he discovered that strategic work requires deep understanding of client needs and industry dynamics. Over the following days, I heard more stories about Richard's struggles. Margaret, his longtime secretary, had called me privately to share her concerns. "He's been in meetings all week trying to figure out how to handle the Meridian situation," she said. "He keeps talking about minor transition issues, but everyone can see he's panicking." According to Margaret, Richard had been working 18-hour days, trying to personally manage projects he'd never fully understood. He'd been taking calls from confused clients, attempting to explain strategic decisions I'd made without having the background knowledge to provide meaningful answers. "He fired you because he thought you were replaceable," Margaret said. "Now he's discovering that some things can't be replaced, they can only be rebuilt, and that takes time he doesn't have." The problems weren't limited to Meridian. 3 other major clients had expressed concerns about project continuity. The manufacturing company where I'd streamlined production processes was facing new inefficiencies that Peterson couldn't diagnose. The financial services firm where I'd implemented risk management protocols was questioning whether their compliance requirements were still being met. Each client complaint represented a crack in the foundation I'd built for Richard's company. He'd assumed that firing me would eliminate a problem, but he'd actually created multiple new problems that were harder to solve than the original issue. The most telling sign of his desperation was the job posting that appeared on industry websites. 2 weeks after my termination. Senior Strategic Consultant, immediate opening, it read. Must have 5+ years experience in operations management, supply chain optimization, and client relationship management. Previous consulting experience required. Competitive salary and benefits package. He was trying to hire my replacement, but the job description was essentially a list of my specific skills and experience. He was looking for another Amanda Collins. But what he'd discover was that expertise like mine couldn't be quickly replicated or easily replaced. The salary range he offered was 40% higher than what he'd been paying me, which suggested he was beginning to understand my actual market value. But money alone wouldn't solve his problem. The new hire would need months to understand the clients, learn the systems, and build the relationships necessary to deliver results. Meanwhile, his current clients were losing confidence in his company's ability to deliver on existing commitments. The digital transformation project at Meridian was just the most visible example of a broader pattern. Promises made by someone who understood the work being fulfilled by people who didn't. I learned from industry contacts that Richard had been reaching out to other consulting firms, trying to find subcontractors who could handle his overflow work. He was essentially admitting that his internal team couldn't manage the projects they'd inherited. But outsourcing strategic work to competitors was expensive and risky. It made his company a middleman rather than a value provider. The most damaging aspect of Richard's situation was that his problems were becoming visible to the entire industry. Consulting is a relationship-based business where reputation is everything. Word was spreading that Hartwell Consulting was struggling to deliver on commitments, that key projects were behind schedule, and that clients were expressing dissatisfaction. His company's problems were compounding. Existing clients were questioning future engagements. Potential clients were hesitating to sign new contracts. The team members he'd retained were overwhelmed and demoralized by the chaos. Richard had thought he was solving a problem by firing me. Instead, he'd revealed that I hadn't just been an employee, I'd been the operational foundation of his entire business. He'd eliminated the person who made his company function, and now he was discovering that businesses can't run on ego and ambition alone. The client complaint email was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, I would receive more forwarded messages, more concerned calls from industry contacts, and more evidence that Richard's carefully planned transition was actually a controlled demolition of his own company. He'd wanted to prove that he didn't need me. Instead, he was proving that his business couldn't survive without the expertise, relationships, and systems I'd provided. The question was whether he'd realize his mistake before it was too late to fix it. The business plan I crafted during those early weeks of independence was unlike anything I'd ever written for Richard's company. Where his proposals were focused on impressing clients with buzzwords and generic methodologies, mine was built on specificity, authenticity, and a clear vision of what consulting could be when done right. Collins Strategic Consulting, Partnership-Based Solutions for Sustainable Growth, I wrote at the top of the 30-page document. The subtitle captured everything I believed about effective consulting. It wasn't about selling predetermined solutions, but about building genuine partnerships that created lasting value. The executive summary laid out my core philosophy. Traditional consulting firms sell expertise. We build relationships. Traditional firms deliver reports. We implement solutions. Traditional firms work for clients. We work with clients. Every word was deliberate, every phrase designed to differentiate my approach from the industry standard. I'd learned from watching Richard's mistakes over the years. He'd built a company that was impressive on paper but hollow in practice. Beautiful presentations that promised more than they delivered. Generic solutions that looked professional but failed to address specific client needs. Relationships that were transactional rather than transformational. My business plan outlined a different approach entirely. Instead of trying to be everything to everyone, I would focus on mid-sized companies facing specific growth challenges. Instead of sending teams of junior consultants, I would personally manage every engagement. Instead of delivering reports and walking away, I would stay involved. Until the solutions were fully implemented and producing results, the financial projections were conservative but encouraging. Based on the inquiries I'd already received, I could reasonably expect to generate $300,000 in revenue during my first year, with overhead costs of less than $50,000. Michael's architectural practice was stable enough to cover our personal expenses. While I built the business, which meant I could focus on quality over quantity, but the most important section of the business plan wasn't about money, it was about mission. Collins Strategic Consulting exists to prove that business consulting can be ethical, effective, and genuinely helpful, I wrote. We believe that every organization has untapped potential, and our role is to help them discover and realize that potential. The operational plan reflected lessons learned from 6 years of building someone else's company. I would maintain a small, highly skilled team rather than hiring junior staff who needed extensive training. I would invest in technology and systems that improved efficiency rather than cutting corners to maximize short-term profits. Most importantly, I would never promise what I couldn't deliver. My service offerings were specific and measurable. Operational efficiency assessments with guaranteed identification of cost-saving opportunities. Supply chain optimization with documented improvement targets. Strategic planning facilitation with clear implementation timelines. Every service was designed to produce tangible results that clients could measure and verify. The marketing strategy was built on authenticity rather than self-promotion. Instead of expensive advertising campaigns, I would focus on thought leadership through industry publications and speaking engagements. Instead of cold calling potential clients, I would nurture the relationships I'd already built and let satisfied clients drive referrals. I'd identified 3 key differentiators that would set Collins Strategic Consulting apart from competitors. First, personal involvement. I would personally lead every engagement rather than delegating to junior staff. Second, implementation focus. My projects would include hands-on support during the critical implementation phase that most consultants avoided. Third, performance accountability. My fees would be partially tied to measurable outcomes rather than just time invested. The team structure I envisioned was lean but powerful. Initially, it would be just me, supported by a network of specialized contractors I could engage for specific projects. As the business grew, I would hire senior-level professionals who shared my commitment to excellence in client service. I would never hire anyone just to increase billing capacity. Technology would be a key enabler of my strategy. I plan to invest in client relationship management software that would track every interaction and ensure nothing fell through the cracks. Project management tools would provide transparency and accountability that clients rarely experienced with traditional consulting firms. Financial systems would enable the kind of performance-based billing that aligned my interests with client success. The competitive analysis section acknowledged the challenges I faced as an independent consultant. Larger firms had brand recognition and resource advantages. But they also had bureaucracy, overhead costs, and the tendency to treat clients as revenue sources rather than partners. My size would be an advantage if I positioned it correctly. Risk management was a crucial consideration. I'd seen too many independent consultants fail because they became dependent on single clients or overextended themselves with projects they couldn't properly manage. My plan included specific strategies for maintaining client diversity, managing cash flow, and ensuring I never committed to more work than I could personally oversee. The growth strategy was ambitious but realistic. Year 1 would focus on establishing credibility and building a foundation of satisfied clients. Year 2 would expand service offerings and begin selective hiring. Year 3 would explore strategic partnerships with complementary service providers. By year 5, Collins Strategic Consulting would be recognized as the premier mid-market consulting firm in the region, but beyond the financial projections and operational details, the business plan represented something more personal, my declaration of independence from Richard's vision of what consulting should be. I was creating the company I'd always wanted to work for, the kind of firm that would have attracted someone like me 6 years ago. Reading through the completed plan, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't experienced in years. This wasn't just about starting a business, it was about proving that integrity and excellence could be profitable, that treating people well was good business strategy, that success didn't require compromising your values. Michael found me at the kitchen table at midnight, still refining the executive summary. "How does it look?" he asked. "Like the company I should have been working for all along," I replied. The business plan was more than a strategic document, it was a manifesto, a commitment to doing things differently, and a roadmap for building something that would outlast any individual client or project. Richard had taught me what not to do. Now I was ready to show the world what was possible when consulting was done right. The emergency board resolution that Patricia Vance forwarded to me was dated exactly 6 weeks after my termination. The formal language couldn't disguise the desperation behind it. Resolved, that Meridian Industries immediately engage alternative consulting resources to ensure continuity of critical digital transformation initiatives, with authority granted to CEO Patricia Vance to negotiate terms necessary to meet Q3 operational deadlines. Patricia's accompanying note was more direct. "Amanda, we're in crisis mode. The project you designed is falling apart under Hartwell's management. Can you meet with me tomorrow? We need to discuss your availability as an independent contractor." I read the resolution 3 times, understanding its implications. Meridian's board had essentially voted no confidence in Richard's ability to deliver on the contract I'd negotiated. They were authorizing Patricia to find alternative solutions, which meant they were prepared to breach their agreement with Hartwell Consulting if necessary. The meeting with Patricia took place in Meridian's executive conference room, the same space where I'd presented my original analysis 3 years earlier. She looked tired, stressed in a way I'd never seen before. The digital transformation project that should have been entering its final phase was months behind schedule and completely off track. "Tell me what's happening," I said, settling into the chair I'd occupied during dozens of previous meetings. Patricia pulled out a thick folder of documents and spread them across the conference table. "Peterson and Matthews don't understand the project architecture you designed. They've been trying to implement pieces without understanding how they connect to the whole system. The result is chaos." She showed me their revised timeline, which bore no resemblance to the carefully sequenced plan I'd developed. They'd prioritized the most visible changes rather than the foundational infrastructure work that needed to happen first. It was like trying to redecorate a house while the foundation was still being poured. The inventory management system integration was supposed to happen before the customer portal launch, I said, pointing to their timeline. "You can't give customers real-time order tracking if the underlying data isn't accurate." "That's exactly what I told them," Patricia said. "But they insisted the portal was more important because it would show immediate results to the board. Now we have customers accessing a system that shows incorrect information, and our credibility is suffering." The situation was worse than I'd imagined. Not only were Richard's consultants incompetent, but they were making decisions that actively damaged Meridian's reputation with their customers. The digital transformation was supposed to improve customer satisfaction, not create new problems. Patricia continued documenting the failures. The staff training program had been rushed and inadequate, leaving employees confused about new procedures. The data migration had been incomplete, creating gaps in historical records that were crucial for business intelligence. The vendor integration that I'd spent months negotiating had been mishandled, resulting in service disruptions and cost overruns. "How bad is it financially?" I asked. "We're looking at a 6-month delay in achieving the efficiency gains we projected to the board," Patricia said. "That translates to approximately $2 million in lost savings this fiscal year. But the real damage is to our customer relationships and employee morale." The emergency board resolution made sense in this context. Meridian's executives weren't just frustrated with poor service, they were facing significant financial losses and reputational damage because of Richard's incompetence. They needed immediate action to salvage a project that was critical to the company's strategic objectives. "What are you asking me to do?" I said, though I already knew the answer. Take over the project, Patricia said. As an independent contractor, we'll handle the legal issues with Hartwell. Our contract includes provisions for consultant replacement if performance standards aren't met. We need someone who understands what we're trying to accomplish and has the expertise to get us back on track. The offer was both an opportunity and a challenge. Taking over a failed project is always risky. There's a tendency for everyone to blame the new consultant if problems persist. But I knew this project better than anyone. I designed every phase, negotiated every vendor relationship, and understood exactly what needed to happen to achieve Meridian's objectives. More importantly, I cared about Meridian's success. Patricia had become more than a client over the years. She was a colleague and friend who trusted me with her company's most important strategic initiative. I couldn't stand by and watch Richard's incompetence destroy something we'd worked so hard to build. I'll need complete authority over project decisions, I said. No interference from Hartwell consultants, no compromises on the implementation sequence, and direct access to your executive team. Done, Patricia said immediately. What else do you need? 2 weeks to assess the current situation and develop a recovery plan, I said. Then 12 weeks to implement the corrections and get the project back on schedule. It won't be easy, but it's doable if everyone commits to following the original design. Patricia smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. That's the Amanda Collins I remember. When can you start? Tomorrow, I said. But I need you to understand something. This isn't just about fixing Meridian's project. This is about proving that good consulting can overcome bad consulting, that expertise matters more than politics, and that clients deserve better than what Richard has been providing. The emergency board resolution had created an opportunity I never could have planned. Meridian wasn't just hiring me as an independent contractor, they were giving me a platform to demonstrate what I could accomplish when I had complete control over a project's execution. Richard had tried to prove that I was replaceable. Instead, he'd created the perfect opportunity for me to prove that I was irreplaceable. The Meridian crisis would become the foundation of my new company's reputation, the case study that would attract other clients who'd experienced similar disappointments with traditional consulting firms. As I left Meridian's offices that day, I realized that Richard's biggest mistake wasn't firing me on my wedding day. His biggest mistake was underestimating what would happen when his clients discovered they had alternatives. The emergency board resolution was more than a business document. It was evidence that quality eventually wins over politics, that competence matters more than company size, and that clients will always choose results over relationships when forced to make that choice. Richard was about to learn these lessons the hard way. The CEO appointment letter arrived by courier on a Thursday morning, 6 weeks after I'd begun rescuing Meridian's digital transformation project. The envelope was marked confidential and bore the embossed logo of Meridian Industries. Inside was a formal offer that would change everything. Dear Ms. Collins, it began. The Board of Directors of Meridian Industries is pleased to offer you the position of Chief Executive Officer of Meridian Dynamics, a newly formed subsidiary focused on operational consulting and business transformation services. I read the letter twice, certain I was misunderstanding something. Patricia had mentioned the possibility of a partnership during our recovery planning sessions, but I'd assumed she meant some kind of preferred vendor arrangement. This was something entirely different. They were offering me the opportunity to lead a consulting division within their company. The compensation package detailed in the letter was staggering. Base salary of $180,000, performance bonuses tied to division revenue, equity participation in the subsidiary, and full benefits, including healthcare, retirement contributions, and professional development funding. It was nearly double what Richard had been paying me, with upside potential that could reach well into 6 figures, but the most significant aspect wasn't the money, it was the mandate. Meridian Dynamics would be positioned as a boutique consulting firm serving mid-market companies, exactly the vision I'd outlined in my business plan. I would have complete authority over hiring, service offerings, and strategic direction. Essentially, they were funding my entrepreneurial vision while providing the security and resources of an established company. The letter explained the reasoning behind the offer. Your exceptional performance in recovering our digital transformation project has demonstrated both technical expertise and leadership capabilities that align with our strategic objectives. The board believes that formalizing our relationship through Meridian Dynamics will create value for both organizations while establishing a new standard for consulting excellence. Patricia had called an hour after the courier delivery. I hope you're sitting down, she said. Because we need to talk about what just landed on your desk. I'm still processing it, I admitted. This is incredibly generous, but I need to understand what you're really asking. What we're asking, Patricia said, is for you to build the consulting company you described to me 6 months ago. The one that focuses on partnership rather than transactions, implementation rather than recommendations, and results rather than billable hours. The conversation that followed revealed the full scope of Meridian's vision. They'd been so impressed with my project recovery work that they'd begun exploring how to leverage my expertise more broadly. Several companies in their network had expressed interest in similar consulting services, and Meridian's board saw an opportunity to create a competitive advantage by offering exclusive access to my capabilities. Think of it as a joint venture, Patricia explained. You get the security and resources of working within an established company, but with complete autonomy to build the practice according to your vision. We get access to consulting expertise that enhances our own competitive position while generating revenue from external clients. The subsidiary structure would allow me to maintain my independent consulting practice while taking on larger, more complex projects that required additional resources. Meridian would provide office space, administrative support, and access to their network of business relationships. In return, they would receive a percentage of revenue and preferential access to my services for their own projects. The timeline was aggressive but achievable. I would have 90 days to establish the subsidiary's operations, hire initial staff, and begin serving external clients. Meridian had already identified 3 potential projects worth over $500,000 in combined revenue, providing immediate cash flow and credibility. Most importantly, the arrangement would position me as the CEO of a legitimate consulting firm rather than an independent contractor. That title would carry weight in the industry, opening doors that might remain closed to a solo practitioner. It would also provide the platform I needed to compete directly with established firms like Richards. The equity component was particularly attractive. I would own 40% of Meridian Dynamics, with the opportunity to increase my ownership through performance milestones. If the subsidiary achieved its revenue targets, I could eventually buy out Meridian's interest and own the company outright. What about my existing independent practice? I asked. That becomes the foundation of Meridian Dynamics, Patricia said. Your current clients, your methodologies, your reputation, everything transfers to the new entity. We're not asking you to start over, we're asking you to scale up. The conversation lasted 2 hours as we worked through details about operational independence, decision-making authority, and long-term strategic objectives. By the end, I understood that Meridian wasn't trying to acquire my business, they were trying to accelerate it. The appointment letter represented validation of everything I'd believed about my own capabilities. For 6 years, I'd built Richard's reputation while undermining my own confidence. Now, a respected company was offering to bet their resources on my vision and expertise. That evening, Michael and I sat at our kitchen table reviewing the offer page by page. This is everything you wanted to build, he said. Security, autonomy, resources, and the chance to prove what you can accomplish when you're in charge. It's also a huge responsibility, I said. If Meridian Dynamics fails, it reflects on both me and them. There's no hiding behind someone else's mistakes. You've been ready for this responsibility for years, Michael said. The only question is whether you're ready to claim it. The CEO appointment letter was more than a job offer, it was recognition that I'd evolved from employee to entrepreneur to executive. It was proof that my worth extended far beyond what any single employer could provide. Most importantly, it was evidence that Richard's attempt to diminish me had actually revealed my true potential. 3 months ago, I'd been fired via email on my wedding day. Now, I was being offered the opportunity to build and lead my own consulting firm with the backing of a respected company. The transformation felt surreal, but it also felt inevitable. Richard had tried to erase me from the consulting industry. Instead, he'd created the conditions for me to become one of its leaders. I signed the appointment letter that night, accepting the challenge and opportunity to prove that consulting could be done differently. Meridian Dynamics would become the company I'd always dreamed of building, ethical, effective, and genuinely committed to client success. The call that changed everything hadn't been a phone call at all. It had been an invitation to step into the role I'd been preparing for my entire career. The series of panicked text messages that Richard sent to my phone at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night revealed the depth of his desperation. I'd been working late at Meridian's offices, finalizing the organizational structure for Meridian Dynamics, when my phone began buzzing with notifications I hadn't expected to see. Amanda, we need to talk. There's been a misunderstanding about your termination. Please call me back. I think we can work something out that benefits everyone. I've been hearing rumors about you joining Meridian. We should discuss this before you make any commitments. This is urgent. My investors are asking questions about the Meridian contract. Can we meet tomorrow? The messages kept coming, each one more desperate than the last. Richard, who had fired me via email without the courtesy of a conversation, was now begging for a face-to-face meeting. The man who had planned my termination for maximum humiliation was reduced to late-night text messages that revealed his panic. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I forwarded the messages to Michael with a note: "Guess who just realized what he lost?" The timing of Richard's outreach wasn't coincidental. Word of my appointment as CEO of Meridian Dynamics had spread quickly through the industry. The announcement would be published in the Business Journal next week, but rumors had already begun circulating. Richard had undoubtedly heard from clients, competitors, or industry contacts that I was no longer an independent contractor struggling to rebuild my career. The next morning brought a formal email that was markedly different in tone from the late-night texts. Richard's assistant had clearly been involved in crafting this message, which attempted to maintain some semblance of professional dignity while essentially groveling for a meeting. "Dear Amanda," it began. "I hope this message finds you well. I've been reflecting on recent changes within our organization and believe there may be opportunities for collaboration that could benefit both Hartwell Consulting and your new venture. Would you be available for a coffee meeting this week to discuss potential synergies?" The corporate speak couldn't disguise what was really happening. Richard's company was in trouble, and he was reaching out to the person he'd fired as a potential solution. The man who had claimed I was a liability to company growth was now suggesting collaboration and synergies. I learned the full extent of his problems from Margaret, who called me that afternoon with an update on the chaos at Hartwell Consulting. "He's been in emergency meetings with his lawyer and accountant for the past week," she said. "The Meridian contract termination is going to cost us the penalty fees you negotiated, plus we're likely to lose 3 other clients who are questioning our ability to deliver on commitments." The financial implications were severe. The Meridian contract had represented nearly 30% of Hartwell's annual revenue, and the penalty clauses I'd insisted upon were designed to protect the client from exactly the kind of incompetence Richard had demonstrated. He would owe Meridian substantial fees for failing to meet project milestones, money his company couldn't afford to pay, but the monetary losses were just the beginning. Richard's reputation in the industry was crumbling as word spread about his mismanagement of major accounts. The consulting business depends heavily on referrals and word-of-mouth recommendations. When a firm fails to deliver on high-profile projects, the damage extends far beyond the immediate client relationship. "He's been trying to hire senior consultants to replace you," Margaret continued, "but everyone he's approached has turned him down. Word is out that Hartwell is a sinking ship, and no one wants to tie their career to his problems." The job postings Richard had been running revealed his desperation. The salary ranges had increased dramatically. He was now offering $120,000 for positions he'd previously filled at $75,000. But experienced consultants weren't interested in joining a company with obvious management problems and an uncertain future. His text messages resumed the next evening, this time with a different approach. "Amanda, I owe you an apology. The way I handled your departure was unprofessional and wrong. I'd like the opportunity to make it right." The sudden admission of guilt was telling. Richard wasn't reaching out because he'd experienced moral enlightenment, he was reaching out because his company was failing and he needed help. His apology was motivated by business necessity, not genuine remorse. The most revealing message came the following day: "I'm prepared to offer you a partnership in Hartwell Consulting. Equal ownership, equal decision-making authority, and full control over client relationships. We can put the past behind us and build something great together." I stared at that message for a long time. 6 months ago, an offer like that would have been a dream come true. Partnership in the company I'd helped build, recognition of my contributions, and the authority to implement my vision for how consulting should be done, but now it felt like too little, too late. Richard was offering me partnership in a damaged company with declining revenue and a tarnished reputation. He was asking me to help him salvage the mess he'd created by firing me. He wanted me to rescue him from the consequences of his own poor judgment. The irony was profound. Richard had fired me because he feared my growing influence with clients. Now he was begging me to return because those same clients no longer trusted his company without me. He'd eliminated the person who made his business successful, and now he was discovering that success couldn't be easily replaced or replicated. His final message of the series was the most honest: "Amanda, I made a mistake. A big one. Hartwell Consulting isn't the same without you, and I don't think it can survive much longer if we don't find a way to work together. Please consider meeting with me. I'm willing to discuss any arrangement that would bring you back." The desperation was complete. Richard Hartwell, CEO and founder of Hartwell Consulting, was admitting that his company couldn't survive without the employee he'd fired via email on her wedding day. He was acknowledging that his 6-year success story had actually been my 6-year success story, but his realization had come too late. I was no longer the ambitious employee who would have been grateful for partnership recognition. I was the CEO of my own company, backed by Meridian's resources and reputation, with complete autonomy to build the consulting practice I'd always envisioned. Richard's panicked text messages weren't just evidence of his desperation, they were proof that I'd been right about my own value all along. The person he'd dismissed as replaceable had become irreplaceable. The employee he'd tried to erase had become his only hope for salvation. I deleted the messages without responding. Richard would have to find his own way out of the crisis he'd created. I had more important things to do than rescue the man who'd tried to destroy my career. The formal apology letter that arrived via certified mail was a masterpiece of desperation disguised as corporate diplomacy. Richard's lawyer had clearly been involved in crafting the 3-page document, which attempted to strike a balance between admission of wrongdoing and preservation of his remaining dignity. Dear Amanda, it began, printed on Hartwell Consulting letterhead that looked somehow smaller and less impressive than I remembered. I am writing to formally acknowledge that your departure from Hartwell Consulting was handled inappropriately, and to express my sincere regret for any distress this may have caused. The language was careful, clinical, designed to admit fault without accepting legal liability. But reading between the lines, it was clear that Richard was terrified of the position he'd put himself in. The letter continued with increasing desperation masked as professional courtesy. Upon reflection, I realized that my decision to terminate your employment was based on incomplete information and flawed assumptions about the company's strategic direction. Your contributions to Hartwell Consulting were far more significant than I initially recognized, and your departure has created challenges that I had not anticipated. Incomplete information. Flawed assumptions. The euphemisms couldn't disguise the reality. Richard had fired his most valuable employee without understanding the consequences. He'd eliminated the person who made his company function and was now discovering that businesses don't run on ego and ambition alone. The second page outlined his proposed solution. I would like to invite you to return to Hartwell Consulting in a role that better reflects your capabilities and contributions. Specifically, I am prepared to offer you the position of Chief Operating Officer with the following terms and conditions. What followed was a compensation package that exceeded even Meridian's generous offer. Base salary of $200,000, equity stake of 25%, signing bonus of $50,000, and complete authority over client relationships and project management. He was essentially offering to make me his partner in everything but name, but the most telling aspect of the offer wasn't the money, it was the admission of dependence. Your expertise in client relationship management and strategic project development has proven to be irreplaceable, he wrote. The company's recent challenges have demonstrated that Hartwell Consulting's success was more closely tied to your individual contributions than I had realized. Reading those words, I felt a mixture of vindication and sadness. Vindication because Richard was finally acknowledging what I'd known for years, that I'd been the operational foundation of his company. Sadness because it had taken the near collapse of his business for him to recognize my value. The letter's third page contained increasingly desperate appeals. I recognize that my previous actions may have damaged the trust between us, but I believe we can rebuild that relationship on a foundation of mutual respect and shared authority. Hartwell Consulting needs your leadership, and I am prepared to restructure the entire organization to ensure your satisfaction and success. He was offering to restructure his entire company around my preferences. The man who had fired me for having too much influence with clients was now begging me to return and take control of those same client relationships. The CEO who had eliminated me for threatening his authority was offering to share that authority in order to survive. The letter concluded with a phrase that revealed the depth of his desperation. I hope you will consider this proposal in the spirit of professional reconciliation and mutual benefit. Hartwell Consulting is not the same company without you, and I fear it may not survive much longer if we cannot find a way to work together. Not the same company without you. May not survive. Richard Hartwell, the man who had built his identity around being the visionary leader of a successful consulting firm, was admitting that his company's survival depended on the person he'd humiliated and discarded. I read the letter 3 times, amazed by how completely the power dynamic had shifted. 6 months ago, I'd been the employee grateful for steady income and hoping for eventual recognition. Now I was the executive being courted by a desperate competitor who'd finally realized what he'd lost, but Richard's offer, generous as it was, missed the fundamental point. I wasn't looking for a better deal with Hartwell Consulting, I was building something entirely different. Meridian Dynamics represented everything I believed consulting could be: ethical, effective, and genuinely focused on client success. Returning to Richard's company would mean abandoning that vision to help him clean up the mess he'd created. The timing of his letter was particularly ironic. It arrived the same week that Meridian Dynamics had been featured in the Business Journal as an innovative new consulting firm led by former Hartwell executive Amanda Collins. The article described my appointment as CEO and outlined my vision for partnership-based consulting that prioritized implementation over recommendations. Richard had undoubtedly read the article, which explained why his formal apology had escalated to job offers and equity participation. He wasn't just trying to hire me back, he was trying to prevent me from competing with him. He'd realized that losing me to a competitor was far worse than losing me to another employer. His follow-up phone call came 2 days later. I let it go to voicemail, curious to hear how desperate he'd become. The message was painful to listen to, a once confident CEO reduced to pleading with the employee he discarded. Amanda, I know you're probably angry with me, and you have every right to be. But I'm hoping we can put the past behind us and focus on the future. I've sent you a formal offer that I think addresses your concerns about recognition and authority. Please consider it carefully. Hartwell Consulting needs you, and I think you'll find that partnership with an established firm offers advantages that a startup cannot provide. The message revealed how little he understood about my current situation. I wasn't running a struggling startup, I was leading a well-funded subsidiary with immediate access to major clients and unlimited growth potential. I wasn't seeking partnership with an established firm, I was building the kind of firm I'd always wanted to work for. Richard's begging was evidence of his complete miscalculation. He'd assumed that firing me would solve his problems and that I would quietly disappear from his professional sphere. Instead, he'd created a competitor who understood his weaknesses and had the resources to exploit them. The formal apology letter joined his panicked text messages in my files, not as potential offers to consider, but as documentation of how completely the tables had turned. Richard Hartwell, who had once held my career in his hands, was now begging for my help to save his own. The man who had tried to erase me from his company was discovering that I'd become essential to its survival. The new company logo for Meridian Dynamics was everything Hartwell Consulting's branding had never been: clean, professional, and authentic. The interlocking circles represented partnership and collaboration, while the deep blue and silver color scheme conveyed trust and expertise. But more than aesthetic choices, the logo symbolized a fundamental shift in how consulting could be approached. Unlike Richard's flashy marketing materials that promised everything and delivered little, Meridian Dynamics' branding was understated and confident. Our tagline, partnership, implementation, results, captured our core philosophy in 3 words. We weren't trying to impress potential clients with clever slogans or industry buzzwords. We were making a simple promise: we would work with you, not for you, and we would stay until the job was done. The office space Patricia had provided was a perfect reflection of our values. Located in Meridian's downtown headquarters, it occupied an entire floor with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the business district. But instead of the sterile corporate environment I'd expected, we'd designed a space that felt more like a collaborative workshop than a traditional consulting firm. The main conference room featured a wall-mounted whiteboard that stretched from floor to ceiling, allowing us to map out complex project timelines and strategic frameworks during client meetings. Smaller breakout spaces were equipped with comfortable seating and advanced video conferencing capabilities, enabling seamless collaboration with remote team members and clients. My office overlooked the city's financial district, a daily reminder of the businesses we served and the impact we could have on their success. But the view that mattered most was internal. Through glass walls, I could see my team at work, collaborating on projects that were changing how mid-market companies approached operational challenges. The hiring process had been unlike anything I'd experienced at Hartwell. Instead of looking for junior consultants who could be molded to fit our methodology, I'd focused on finding senior-level professionals who shared our commitment to client success and ethical business practices. Each team member brought specialized expertise that complemented our overall capabilities. Sarah Chen, my director of operations, had left a prestigious position at a Big Four firm specifically to join our team. I was tired of being a cog in a machine that prioritized billable hours over actual results, she'd told me during her interview. I want to work somewhere that measures success by client outcomes, not revenue targets. Marcus Williams, our director of strategic development, had been running his own successful independent practice before joining Meridian Dynamics. I realized I could have more impact as part of a team than I could working alone, he'd explained. But only if that team shared my values about how consulting should be done. The culture we'd built was deliberately different from traditional consulting firms. We held weekly team meetings where everyone, regardless of seniority, could contribute ideas and feedback. Client success stories were celebrated more than financial milestones. Most importantly, we maintained the kind of work-life balance that attracted and retained top talent. Our service offerings had evolved based on client feedback and market demand. Instead of the generic business consulting that most firms promoted, we developed specific expertise in operational efficiency, digital transformation, and organizational development. Each service line was led by someone with deep industry experience and a track record of delivering measurable results. The client roster we'd assembled in our first 6 months was impressive both in quality and diversity. Beyond Meridian Industries, we were working with a regional bank on risk management optimization, a manufacturing company on supply chain redesign, and a healthcare organization on operational streamlining. Each engagement was different, but all were united by our commitment to implementation and long-term partnership. Our project management approach had become a competitive differentiator. Instead of delivering reports and recommendations, we stayed engaged through the entire implementation process. Clients knew that when they hired Meridian Dynamics, they weren't just buying advice, they were getting a partner committed to their success. The financial results had exceeded even our optimistic projections. In 6 months, we generated $1.20 million in revenue with profit margins that traditional consulting firms couldn't match. Our overhead was low because we invested in technology and efficiency rather than expensive office space and unnecessary staff. More importantly, our client retention rate was 100%. Every client had extended their initial engagement or hired us for additional projects. Industry recognition had followed naturally. The Business Journal had featured us in their Innovative Companies to Watch section. I'd been invited to speak at 3 industry conferences about our partnership-based approach to consulting. Most satisfying was the growing number of consultants from other firms who were reaching out about opportunities to join our team. The contrast with Richard's struggling company was becoming more pronounced each week. While Hartwell Consulting was losing clients and laying off staff, Meridian Dynamics was growing steadily and selectively. While Richard was cutting costs and reducing services to maintain profitability, we were investing in capabilities that would drive future growth. The logo that adorned our business cards, letterhead, and office walls represented more than a brand identity. It represented proof that consulting could be done differently. We'd shown that prioritizing client outcomes over billable hours could be profitable. We'd demonstrated that treating employees well was good business strategy. We'd proven that ethical business practices and commercial success weren't mutually exclusive. Patricia had become more than a sponsor, she'd become a true partner in building something that would outlast any individual project or client relationship. "You've created exactly what I hoped you would," she'd told me during our quarterly review. "A consulting firm that I would want to work with, led by someone I trust completely." The Meridian Dynamics logo had become a symbol of what was possible when expertise, integrity, and opportunity aligned. It represented the company I'd always dreamed of building and the career I'd always wanted to have. Most importantly, it represented proof that Richard's attempt to diminish me had actually launched me toward my greatest professional success. Looking at our logo on the wall of my corner office, I realized that I'd built something more valuable than Richard could have ever imagined. Not just a successful business, but a new standard for what consulting could be when done with genuine commitment to client success. The empire I'd built was founded on the principles Richard had never understood, that trust is more valuable than profit, that partnership creates more value than transactions, and that long-term success requires short-term sacrifice. These weren't just business strategies, they were the foundation of everything Meridian Dynamics represented. The industry conference name tag that hung around my neck read Amanda Collins, CEO, Meridian Dynamics, in bold letters that seemed to glow under the convention center's bright lights. It was the Regional Business Leadership Summit, the same conference where I'd met Michael 3 years ago, but my role here today was entirely different from the junior consultant who'd given presentations hoping someone would notice. I was the keynote speaker for the afternoon session on Innovative Approaches to Business Consulting, addressing an audience of 400 industry professionals about how Meridian Dynamics had redefined client relationships and service delivery. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was speaking at the same conference where Richard had once introduced me as his rising star, back when he still believed he controlled my career trajectory. The morning had been a whirlwind of networking conversations, client meetings, and interview requests from business journalists covering the conference. Word had spread that the woman who'd built Hartwell Consulting and then launched its most successful competitor would be speaking about the future of the industry. The anticipation was palpable, and not just because of professional curiosity. I was reviewing my presentation notes in the speaker's lounge when I saw him. Richard stood near the registration table, scanning name tags and trying to blend into conversations with people who clearly didn't want to engage with him. He looked older, worn down by the stress of watching his company collapse while mine flourished. His expensive suit couldn't disguise the desperation in his posture. Our eyes met across the crowded space, and for a moment, time seemed suspended. Here were the two people whose professional relationship had defined an industry story that everyone was talking about: the mentor who'd become threatened by his protégé's success, and the employee who'd built an empire from the ashes of her dismissal. Richard approached slowly, his usual confidence replaced by something that looked almost like humility. "Amanda," he said, extending his hand. "Congratulations on your success. I saw the announcement about your keynote speech." "Richard," I replied, accepting the handshake briefly. "Thank you. How is Hartwell Consulting doing?" It was a cruel question. And we both knew it. Everyone in the industry knew exactly how Hartwell Consulting was doing, hemorrhaging clients, laying off staff, and struggling to maintain credibility after a series of high-profile project failures. "We're going through some transitions," he said, the corporate euphemism failing to mask his distress. "Actually, that's why I was hoping to speak with you today. I know our last conversation didn't go well, but I was wondering if we could find a few minutes to talk privately." The request was pathetic in its transparency. Richard wasn't interested in congratulating me on my success. He was making one last desperate attempt to salvage his failing company by appealing to the person he'd wronged most profoundly. "I'm quite busy today," I said, gesturing toward the conference schedule. "Perhaps you could email me to arrange something." The suggestion was deliberately dismissive, a reminder that he'd chosen email as his preferred method of communication when he'd fired me. Richard's face flushed as he recognized the reference, but he pressed forward with the desperate persistence of a drowning man. "Amanda, please. I know I handled things poorly between us, but we both know that the industry is better when we're working together rather than against each other. Maybe there's a way we can find some common ground." Common ground. The phrase was rich with irony. Richard was suggesting that the person he'd humiliated and betrayed should find common ground with him now that his career was in ruins. He was asking for mercy from the woman he'd tried to destroy. "Richard," I said, my voice calm but firm, "I think you're confused about our current relationship. We're not working against each other, we're not working together at all. You're struggling to maintain a business that was built on taking credit for other people's work. I'm building a business that's founded on giving people credit for their contributions. Those aren't competing approaches, they're fundamentally different philosophies." His face went pale as I continued. "You fired me via email on my wedding day because you thought I was a threat to your authority. Now you're discovering that your authority was entirely dependent on my competence. That's not a problem I can solve for you, it's a lesson you needed to learn." The conversation was drawing attention from nearby industry professionals who recognized both of us. Richard was acutely aware that his public plea for reconciliation was being witnessed by the same people who would judge his company's viability for future partnerships. "I made mistakes," he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "I let my ego get in the way of good business judgment. But surely there's some way we can move past this. Your success doesn't have to mean my failure." "Actually, Richard, it does," I replied with the quiet confidence that comes from complete vindication. "You build your success on denying me credit for my work. My success is built on taking responsibility for my own achievements. One of those approaches is sustainable, and the other isn't." The finality in my voice seemed to break something in him. For 6 years, he'd been the powerful CEO who controlled my career. For 6 months, he'd been the desperate supplicant begging for my help. Now, in this moment, he was simply a man confronting the consequences of his own choices. "The Meridian contract alone would have saved us," he said, almost to himself. "If I could just explain to Patricia how the misunderstandings happened." "There were no misunderstandings, Richard," I interrupted. "You fired the person who built that relationship because you were threatened by her competence. Patricia didn't transfer her business to Meridian Dynamics because of misunderstandings, she transferred it because she wanted to work with someone she trusted." The public address system crackled to life, announcing that the afternoon keynote session would begin in 10 minutes. My session, the presentation that would cement my reputation as a thought leader in the industry Richard had once dominated. "I need to prepare for my speech," I said, effectively ending our conversation. "Good luck with your transitions, Richard." As I walked away, I heard him call my name one last time. "Amanda, please. Don't let your success be built on my destruction." I turned back to face him one final time. "Richard, my success isn't built on your destruction. It's built on everything you taught me not to do. Thank you for that education." The industry conference name tag I wore as I walked toward the main auditorium represented more than my current title, it represented the complete reversal of our professional relationship. Richard had once introduced me at conferences as his employee. Now I was the featured speaker while he was the struggling CEO hoping someone would listen to his desperate appeals. The final confrontation hadn't been dramatic or emotional, it had been the quiet, professional dismissal of someone whose relevance had expired. Richard's destruction hadn't been caused by my success. It had been caused by his own choices and the consequences that inevitably followed. Standing at the podium 20 minutes later, looking out at an audience that included the man who'd once controlled my career, I realized that the best revenge wasn't destroying Richard, it was becoming everything he'd never had the vision or integrity to be. The thank you card from Meridian Industries arrived on a quiet Friday afternoon, 6 months after the industry conference where I'd delivered my keynote speech. Handwritten on elegant cream cardstock, it bore Patricia Vance's personal signature. And a message that captured the transformation our partnership had achieved. Dear Amanda, it read. As we close the books on our most successful fiscal year in company history, I wanted to personally thank you for the leadership and vision that made it possible. The digital transformation project that nearly failed under previous management has become our competitive advantage, generating $8.2 million in cost savings and positioning us for sustainable growth. More importantly, your approach to consulting has changed how we think about partnerships and what's possible when expertise meets integrity. The card included metrics that told the story of genuine transformation. Customer satisfaction scores had reached all-time highs. Employee productivity had increased by 32%. Most significantly, Meridian had been able to expand into 2 new markets based on the operational efficiencies we'd created together, but the numbers, impressive as they didn't capture the personal satisfaction I felt reading Patricia's words. This wasn't just about business success, it was about proving that consulting could be done ethically and effectively when the right values guided the work. Your influence extends far beyond our immediate results, Patricia continued. The standards you've established at Meridian Dynamics have raised expectations throughout our industry. Other consulting firms are being measured against the benchmark you've created, and our vendor relationships have improved across the board as service providers recognize they must deliver real value to compete. The ripple effects of our success had indeed spread throughout the regional business community. 3 other consulting firms had reached out to discuss potential partnerships or learn about our methodologies. Several had begun restructuring their own service offerings to emphasize implementation and long-term client relationships rather than short-term project deliverables. Meanwhile, Richard's company had continued its decline. Hartwell Consulting had officially filed for bankruptcy protection 2 months earlier, unable to recover from the client losses and reputation damage that followed my departure. The Business Journal had covered the story with a headline that captured the industry consensus: consulting firms' fall demonstrates importance of retaining key talent. Margaret had called to let me know that Richard was closing the office and liquidating assets. He asked me to reach out to you, she'd said. He wanted you to know that he understands now what he lost when he fired you. He said to tell you that your success proves he was wrong about everything. The message felt like closure, though not in the way Richard had intended. His admission wasn't about seeking forgiveness, it was about acknowledging a truth that everyone else had recognized months earlier. His failure wasn't my responsibility to fix or forgive. It was simply the natural consequence of his choices and the business philosophy those choices represented. My marriage to Michael had grown stronger through the challenges of the past year. He'd watched me transform from a devastated employee to a confident CEO, supporting every step of the journey without trying to protect me from the risks of entrepreneurship. You're not the same person who got fired on our wedding day, he told me recently. You're the person you were always meant to be. That observation felt true in ways I was still discovering. The humiliation of Richard's betrayal had forced me to confront questions about my own worth and capabilities that I might never have explored otherwise. Building Meridian Dynamics from nothing had proven to myself, not just to others, that my success hadn't been dependent on Richard's platform or approval. The healing process had been gradual but profound. The anger that had sustained me through the early months of independence had evolved into something more constructive, a determination to build something better than what I'd lost. The hurt of betrayal had transformed into gratitude for the push I'd needed to claim my full potential. Meridian Dynamics now employed 12 consultants and had a waiting list of potential clients. We'd been featured in Harvard Business Review as an example of how mid-market consulting could differentiate itself through authentic partnership and implementation focus. I'd been invited to join the board of the Regional Business Development Council, a recognition of my standing in the community, but the most meaningful validation wasn't external recognition, it was the culture we'd created and the results we delivered for clients every day. Our team meetings began with client success stories rather than revenue reports. Our performance evaluations emphasized collaboration and ethical behavior as much as technical competence. Most importantly, everyone who worked at Meridian Dynamics understood that our success was built on making our clients more successful. The thank you card from Patricia represented more than appreciation for a job well done, it was evidence that business relationships could be built on mutual respect and shared objectives rather than power dynamics and exploitation. It proved that treating people well wasn't just the right thing to do, but the profitable thing to do over the long term. Reading her words, I reflected on the complete transformation of my professional life. A year ago, I'd been an undervalued employee hoping for recognition from someone who saw me as a threat to his authority. Now I was a respected business leader whose opinions were sought by industry publications and whose company was held up as a model for ethical consulting practices. Richard's attempt to destroy my career had actually launched my greatest professional success. His betrayal had forced me to discover capabilities I might never have tested. His cruelty had taught me the importance of treating others with dignity and respect. His failure had shown me what not to do when building a sustainable business. The justice wasn't in his downfall, it was in my rise. The healing wasn't in his apology, it was in my independence. The success wasn't in proving him wrong, it was in proving myself right about what was possible when expertise, integrity, and opportunity aligned. Patricia's thank you card would join the growing collection of client testimonials and industry recognition that documented not just business success, but personal transformation. It was evidence that the woman who'd been fired via email on her wedding day had become someone who would never again allow others to define her worth or limit her potential. The card was a reminder that the best revenge isn't destruction, it's creation. Building something better, treating people well, and succeeding on your own terms while maintaining your values and dignity. Richard had tried to write the ending to my story. Instead, he'd given me the motivation to write a much better beginning. The mentorship program charter that I signed on a bright Tuesday morning represented the culmination of everything I'd learned about leadership, resilience, and the responsibility that comes with success. The document established the Collins Foundation for Professional Development, a nonprofit initiative designed to support mid-career professionals who'd experienced workplace betrayal or discrimination. The Collins Foundation exists to prove that setbacks can become setups for greater success, I'd written in the mission statement. We believe that every professional deserves to work in an environment that values their contributions, respects their dignity, and provides opportunities for growth. When that environment doesn't exist, we help people create it for themselves. The Foundation's first cohort included 12 professionals, men and women who'd been fired unfairly, passed over for promotions they'd earned, or marginalized by supervisors who felt threatened by their competence. Each had a story that resonated with my own experience, though the details varied across industries and circumstances. There was Jennifer, a marketing director who'd been terminated after refusing to take credit for her team's work. Marcus, an IT manager who'd been eliminated during a reorganization that coincidentally occurred after he'd questioned his supervisor's unethical practices. Sarah, a financial analyst who'd been pushed out after her research contradicted her boss's preferred narrative about company performance. Each mentorship session reminded me of how common my experience actually was. Workplace betrayal wasn't an isolated incident, it was a systemic problem that destroyed careers and demoralized talented people who deserved better. But it was also an opportunity for transformation, if people had the support and guidance necessary to navigate the challenge. The program combined practical business education with emotional support and strategic planning. Participants learned about entrepreneurship, networking, personal branding, and financial planning. But they also participated in discussions about resilience, self-worth, and the psychology of recovering from professional trauma. The goal isn't to turn everyone into entrepreneurs, I explained during our monthly group sessions. The goal is to help you understand your own value so that you never again allow someone else's insecurity to define your career trajectory. The Foundation's offices occupied a floor of Meridian's building, donated by Patricia as part of her commitment to supporting professional development in our community. The space was designed to feel welcoming and empowering, comfortable seating areas for group discussions, private offices for one-on-one mentoring, and a resource center stocked with business books, industry publications, and career development materials. Michael had become the Foundation's unofficial advisor on work-life balance and relationship management. Professional success means nothing if it costs you your personal happiness, he reminded participants. Amanda's strength came partly from having a support system that believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. The success stories emerging from our first year were remarkable. 3 participants had launched successful independent consulting practices. 2 had been promoted to senior leadership positions at new companies. 4 had negotiated significant improvements in their compensation and working conditions at their current employers. Most importantly, all 12 had regained the confidence and professional self-respect that workplace betrayal had temporarily stolen. The Foundation's work had attracted national attention. Harvard Business School had invited me to guest lecture on transforming professional setbacks into strategic advantages. The Wall Street Journal had featured our program in an article about innovative approaches to career development. Most gratifying was the steady stream of inquiries from professionals around the country who wanted to replicate our model in their own communities, but the real validation came from the participants themselves. During our year-end celebration, Jennifer stood up to share her story. A year ago, I thought my career was over. I'd been fired from a job I loved by a boss who felt threatened by my success. I was angry, hurt, and convinced that the industry would side with him over me. This program taught me that my value wasn't determined by one person's opinion, and that setbacks could become launching pads if I had the courage to use them that way. Her words echoed my own journey so closely that I had to fight back tears. The Collins Foundation wasn't just helping other people recover from workplace betrayal, it was giving meaning to my own experience. Richard's cruelty had created more than just my personal success, it had enabled me to help others transform their own challenges into opportunities. Looking around the room at 12 professionals who'd reclaimed their careers and dignity, I realized that this was the true measure of victory. Not Richard's failure, not my financial success, not even the industry recognition, but the ability to turn personal pain into purpose that served others. The mentorship program charter represented a commitment to ensure that what happened to me would help prevent similar experiences for others. Every professional who learned to value themselves properly, every entrepreneur who built an ethical business, every leader who treated employees with dignity, they were all extensions of the lesson Richard had unknowingly taught me. 3 years had passed since that devastating wedding day email. In that time, I'd built a successful company, established my reputation as an industry leader, and created a foundation that was changing lives. But more importantly, I discovered who I was when I wasn't defined by someone else's approval or disapproval. The woman who'd been fired via email on her wedding day had become someone who would never again allow others to determine her worth. The employee who'd been discarded as expendable had become a leader who understood that every person's contributions matter. The victim of workplace betrayal had become an advocate for professional dignity and ethical business practices. Richard had tried to write the ending to my story when he fired me. Instead, he'd given me the beginning of a much larger narrative about resilience, transformation, and the responsibility that comes with success. The Collins Foundation would ensure that narrative continued, helping others discover their own strength and potential long after my own career had ended. Signing the mentorship program charter, I smiled at the irony. Richard had fired me because he thought I was a threat to his company. He'd been right, I was a threat to everything his company represented. I was a threat to the idea that talent could be exploited without consequences. I was a threat to the belief that success required compromising your values. I was a threat to the assumption that powerful people could treat others poorly without accountability. But I'd become something more dangerous than a threat to one man's company. I'd become an example of what was possible when expertise, integrity, and opportunity aligned. And through the Collins Foundation, I was helping others become the same kind of threat to mediocrity, exploitation, and workplace injustice. The new beginning wasn't just mine, it belonged to everyone who refused to let setbacks define their potential. Richard's betrayal had taught me that the best revenge isn't destruction. It's creation, transformation, and the commitment to building something better than what came before. The story that began with a devastating email on my wedding day had become a foundation for helping others write their own stories of resilience and success. That transformation, more than any business achievement or industry recognition, was the true measure of how completely the tables had turned.